By the early 1880s, one man controlled around 90% of America's refined oil industry. Not through luck, not through one genius invention, but through a strategy so methodical, so brutally efficient, that the US government was eventually forced to break his empire apart. This is how John D. Rockefeller built the most powerful monopoly in American history, and why his story should still worry us today. In the 1860s, the Pennsylvania oil boom looked less like an industry and more like a stampede. Wells were drilled wherever someone smelled a chance to get rich. Refineries popped up overnight and disappeared just as fast. Prices swung violently. A barrel could be worth a fortune one month and almost nothing the next. Most refiners were gamblers. Rockefeller was not. Before oil, he worked as a bookkeeper. He obsessed over numbers, margins, and tiny savings most people didn't even notice. When he entered refining, he didn't bet on striking the biggest well. He bet on something far less spectacular, but far more dangerous in the long term, becoming the most efficient, most reliable, most disciplined refiner in the market. He made barrels a little lighter. He tightened pipes, improved safety, standardized kerosene quality so customers knew exactly what they were buying. Every small saving was reinvested. Better equipment, better processes, better people. And, step by step, the buyout of weaker refineries. While others rode the roller coaster of boom and bust, Standard Oil of Ohio started to look like the one refinery that didn't T-panic when prices crashed. Rockefeller wasn't just building a business, he was quietly assembling a machine, one designed to survive any price war and slowly pull the rest of the industry into its orbit. But raw efficiency still doesn't explain 90% of a market. The real turning point came when Rockefeller realized that the true battlefield wasn't just inside the refinery walls. It was on the rails. In the 1870s, if you wanted to sell oil across America, you needed the railroads. They were the arteries of industry. And Rockefeller understood one brutal truth. If you control the terms of transport, you control who survives. Because Standard shipped so much volume, he could promise railroads something they craved: steady, predictable traffic. In exchange, he demanded special conditions, lower rates, favorable agreements, logistics tailored to his needs. Those deals slashed Standard's transport costs, letting Rockefeller cut prices and still make money. Independents, who paid higher rates, suddenly found their margins squeezed to almost nothing. When Rockefeller approached them with an offer to buy their refinery, his message sounded almost merciful. Join us and share in the efficiency. Or stay outside and face ruin. Many sold. Some tried to fight and went bankrupt. Piece by piece, the chaotic map of small refineries began to reorganize itself around a single center of gravity: Standard Oil. As Standard absorbed more refineries in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and beyond, Rockefeller pushed an idea that was radical for the 19th century: total integration. He didn't want just one strong refinery. He wanted to control every key step between the oil well and the customer's lamp. Standard invested in storage tanks and, later on, in some production. Midstream, the company helped build and control pipelines, reducing its dependence on the railroads that had once been its greatest leverage. Downstream, it owned tank cars, terminals, warehouses, export hubs, and distribution networks reaching from American small towns to foreign ports. Every new piece added power. Pipelines meant Rockefeller could bypass railroads that pushed too hard. Tank cars and depots meant he could flood a market quickly with cheap kerosene. Overseas branches turned American oil into a global weapon. Because costs dropped with every efficiency gain, Standard could keep cutting prices. Customers saw safer, cheaper kerosene and had little reason to care whether 1 or 10 companies supplied it. By the late 1870s and into the 1880s, historians estimate that Standard Oil handled around 90% of U.S. refined oil. Not an exact number carved in stone, but enough to say that, in practice. One system controlled almost everything that came out of American refineries. managing this web of companies required a new legal tool. In 1882, Rockefeller and his partners created the Standard Oil Trust, a holding structure that placed dozens of companies under one group of trustees. On paper, many firms still looked independent. They kept their old names and local managers. In reality, strategy flowed from a single top. One brain, many arms. From the inside, Rockefeller saw this as rational order replacing wasteful chaos. From the outside, many Americans saw something very different: a private empire. Independent refiners complained they were being systematically eliminated. Farmers feared a company that could quietly raise or lower fuel prices across huge regions. Newspapers published cartoons showing Standard Oil as a giant octopus, wrapping its arms around Congress, railroads, and the public. And then came the journalist who turned suspicion into a case: Ida Tarbell. Her father had run a small refinery. Standard Oil's rise and its special treatment from the railroads helped to crush his business. Years later, Ida became an investigative journalist. She spent years following rail contracts, corporate records, and testimonies that nobody in New York or Cleveland really wanted on the record. Her expose revealed the brutal truth in simple language. Railroad companies were paying Standard Oil secret rebates on its shipments while charging many of its competitors much higher rates for the same routes. It wasn't fair competition. It was systematic elimination, written into contracts. Her work outraged the public and gave the U.S. government something it had lacked for years: documented proof of how Standard Oil really operated behind its respectable facade. By the early 1900s, the government moved. Using the Sherman Antitrust Act, it took Standard Oil to court. After long legal battles, in 1911, the Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly and ordered it broken up into 34 separate companies. On paper, Rockefeller's empire was destroyed. But here's the twist that feels almost like a joke. Rockefeller owned shares across the whole trust. When Standard Oil split, those shares turned into stakes in multiple new giants, companies that would later be known as Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and more. The breakup didn't wipe out his fortune, it multiplied it. Within a few years, he was widely considered the richest man in modern history. The government tried to punish him. They turned him into a legend instead. So what's the real lesson? That 90% wasn't built overnight. It was decades of ruthless optimization, integration, and operating in legal gray zones the law hadn't caught up with yet. And here's what should worry us today. When you look at modern tech giants controlling search, social media, cloud infrastructure, or app stores, you're looking at the same pattern in a different costume. Rockefeller controlled oil barrels. Today's giants control something even more valuable: your data, your attention, your digital infrastructure. And just like in 1880, we're often asking the key question too late. At what point does efficiency become dangerous dependence on a private gatekeeper? Here's what makes this story timeless. Rockefeller wasn't a cartoon villain. He was efficient, terrifyingly, systematically efficient. That's exactly why concentrated power is so hard to see in time and so hard to challenge once it's in place. So I want to hear from you. If a modern company controlled around 90% of a critical industry today, whether it's energy, data, search, or payments, would you trust it to stay benevolent? Or should governments step in early before it becomes untouchable? Tell me yes or no, and more importantly, why? And if you want more deep dives into the real stories behind money and power, subscribe to the Finance Legends, because this history is not over. We're still living in its shadow.